All right, I am here with Hakan Spuhr, the founder of Spuhr Mounts. Now, I've been getting a lot of questions about wet mounting. Is it a real thing? Does it make a difference? What's the process? And from everything I've been told by my buddy Eric Cortina, you are the man behind it and can give us the real deal on it.
Yeah, we did have a sponsored shooter here in the US, and he was shooting a weekend match years ago. I think it was like 2016. He did really well on the Saturday, and the gun was standing on the bipod Saturday evening at the hotel, and it fell over, and he didn't hit very well on the Sunday. So he called me and said, there's something wrong with the mount. And I said immediately, no, there is not. There's nothing wrong with the mount. There's probably something wrong with the scope. So he went to the service center, and they checked it up in the collimator, and there was nothing wrong with the scope. So he called me back. So I took in one of my milling machines back home, put up two Ys, one with a big heavy Picatinny rail, mounting up a scope in our scope mount in the Ys, and a separate Ys 2 feet away on the same table where I put the handheld collimator instrument. And the handheld collimator instrument is basically a rifle scope that I can look into your rifle scope, and I can measure the subtensions in the reticle, and I can also measure how big a click is. It's really convenient with this kind of production we have. So now I have everything mounted up, torqued the scope down and everything perfect, zeroed the collimator to the main scope, and I slapped the scope. Like a good slap to start the bar fight. And we have a 0.4 mil deviation. And I slapped the scope with the other hand, with the left hand from the other side, and it went back to zero. So
wow.
however I did it, it was all the ways between 0 and 0.4, 0.5 something. Then I took all the other mounts that I could find that I have back at home, and I have a lot of other manufacturers' mounts. So I did the same thing with this. The worst mount I tried had 3 mil deviation.
Wow.
The next worst mount had 1.9 mil deviation, and both of those mounts are well-known brands. There was one mount, or actually rings, that stuck out because they had very, very little deviation. They were brand new, steel, and they came oily. So they were dripping in oil. Mounting it on, and I had very little deviation. So I had a bottle of CLP. I took the CLP, just poured it out of my Picatinny rail, took our scope mount with our scope, put it back on, torqued it down, zeroed my collimator, slapped it, 0.1 mil, or zero. So very little to nothing. Then I checked it out, and I called back to our sponsor shooter and told him, this is my findings. And he didn't really believe me, of course. I wouldn't have done that myself. So he went out to the shooting range with his favorite rifle and did a lot of testing in the wild. And a lot of the PRS top shooters today, they're wet mounting because of this. What I want to see is some kind of lubricant between the mating surfaces between the Picatinny rail and the scope mount. That's it. I would assume that there is differences between different lubricants, but I don't know. I haven't tested it far enough, and I have had sufficiently good results with both grease and CLP. So some kind of lubricant that takes down the high friction between the mount and the Picatinny rail. And what I expect happens is that the mount or the rings sits on friction, so when it gets the hit, it moves on the friction.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I obviously the wet mounting has sort of taken on a life of its own on the interwebs. One of the things that I have seen is an occasional mention of people saying, oh, wet mounting includes putting oil inside of my rings as well. But let's clarify, we are strictly talking Picatinny rail to mount only.
Yeah, or whatever rail we have.
Right,
I mean,
rings, whatever it is.
I mean, if we have a Tikka rail or any other kind of rail, I would do the same thing there.
Yeah.
When it comes to inside the rings, I really like to put rose in there because it has extreme friction, and I have had really good results with that.
Okay.
And it's not really needed for a 6mm gun. It's more needed for heavy scopes on heavy recoiling rifles, so to not have a scope that slips in the rings. That said, anything worth killing is always worth overkilling. So why not always put rose in there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Incredibly articulate on the subject. You clearly understand. And I'm glad that we can put it to rest as the right way to do it, why it matters, and that it does make a difference.
And I would like to add one more thing.
Sure.
When you put in screws, especially when it comes to hard-coated surfaces, aluminium hard-coated surfaces and screws, you really need oils. And it's always recommended from a manufacturer that you lubricate your screws.
Okay.
So it's kind of the same deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's probably something that often gets overlooked.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of SHOT Show.
Thank you.